Hello and welcome to the next 100 Days podcast. My name is Graham Arrowsmith.
And my name's Kevin Appleby. Graham, we've got another Australian guest.
Yeah, well, we've been blessed because one of our previous guests was Jenny Stillwell. And the thing is, Jenny, it's a bit like the old Harry Pilkington joke, the one where there's two people staring up at in St. Peter's Square. And the guy says, well, who's that there? And I don't know the guy in the white hat, but that's Jenny Stillwell. So basically, she knows everybody in Australia, and she knows this guy, and he's called Shane Michael Hatton. Welcome, Shane, to the next 100 Days podcast.
Jenny is an absolute Australian icon, so it's a delight to be connected with anyone that she's connected with.
Well, you're very welcome, but you're also a bit of an expert when it comes to I guess leadership and what goes behind making good leaders. How did you get started in this area, Shane?
Oh, it's a very eclectic background and I often find that with a lot of your experience, you don't realize how valuable the experience was until you get the gift of hindsight to look back at it.
Yeah.
But if I was to kind of boil it down into two categories, it's been a intersection of business and people. So I've had a number of different leadership and culture roles in charity, government, retail, all different kinds of organizations. My background's actually in marketing, and I started out in marketing and event management, which is a bit of a strange place to start, but now with the gift of hindsight, looking back, it was very, very helpful. And I went out of there into psychology, and so did counseling and did a lot of working with people. And so I found a lot of my expertise now comes from operating just at that intersection between business and people.
Yeah, well, it really interesting because I mean, Kevin and I have sort of worked together going on 9 years, and I still don't understand him. He's a strange character, but he's come from the Newcastle area. Their eyes are set a little bit too close together up there, So I just don't quite understand him that well, Kevin.
Well, so you've got to get to know people, Graham. You've got to
Right.
do better. You've got to
That's
try.
the
We're all
secret
complex, right? We're
That's
all
the secret.
complex people.
And that's why we invite really interesting guests on to make up for Kevin and I's lack of interest in characteristics. But Shane, I mean, it's an interesting thing that you're at that intersection between business and people. But aren't we all?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every business is made up of very unique, different, and complex people, and somehow we find ourselves in this great collision of culture about which is the way I do things, the way you do things, all kind of colliding in the place we call business and work. And so I love helping people and organizations figure out, well, how do we harness the power of all of our differences and find a way to make them work at work?
When you walk into organizations, do you find that the people that you meet, are they kind of basket cases, or is that the reason that they've kind of invited you in? That crikey, or somebody else has invited you in. That's probably a smart move on somebody else's part. And then they say, Harry over there, he needs a bit of help.
Graham, we all need help. I don't know anybody that I've met that hasn't felt like they're a basket case themselves. But I mean, if you are looking for an external consultant to come into an organization, sometimes they bring me in because they are in desperate need of help and they've been trying the same thing over and over again. It's not working. Other times, sometimes they just need someone to come in and say the same thing that they've been saying 10 times. But because somebody externally says it, everyone goes, "This is incredible. This is amazing."
I wonder how many times I've heard that in my life, but it is very, very true. I mean, you make remarkable the kind of. I mean, they're already pretty good. They've got to a pretty good level in life, but you kind of bring something else out into them. And what's the sort of secret sauce that you sort of sprinkle on them?
Yeah, I use the word remarkable, not because I wanted to associate it with something that felt spectacular or, fancy or showy, but remarkable is the word. Have you ever had somebody who has maybe said something to you, they go, have you ever had that leader that at some point in your career has made a real impact on your life? They said something, they did something, they led you in a particular way, and they've always been that person that stands out in the back of your mind. When I think of the word remarkable, remarkable is something that stands out in your memory. And so my goal in developing remarkable leaders is to try to kind of create the leaders that you would look back on one day and go, gee, that person made a big difference in my life.
Yeah, yeah. I interested in that, Kevin.
How do you start that process then, Shane? Is that getting the people that you're coaching to look back at the leaders that they've personally found remarkable?
Yeah, I mean it's probably all of those things. It would be looking back at some of the examples of leadership that have been set for you. And this is, I think, we're at a really interesting point in the world of work at the moment that we have kind of 3/4 generations in the workforce. And we've got people who are looking to an example of leadership, which is one style of leadership. They're living a second style of leadership, and then they're leading people who like to be led in a very different way. So it's a really complex time to be leading people right now. So you kind of have to look at, well, what worked for me in the past, but what's expected of me in the future, and try to establish this new way of leading altogether. So that would be a starting point, is to look at, well, how have I been led in the past? And is that the most effective way of leading people into the future? And then really, I guess, putting on the hat of a student and a learner and going out into the workplace and asking, okay, well, what can I do to be a more effective leader? What are some of the capabilities that are required for me? What are some of the support networks and mentoring relationships I need to develop to get better at that? And then also, what are some of the internal beliefs and systems that I need to develop to make sure that I'm showing up in the most effective way possible?
It's interesting that you mentioned that there are different um, categories of people. Is that this sort of, Kevin's probably, I don't know, what are you, Kevin, generation? Well, we forgot the number because it's so long ago when he was born. But
I
then
think
there's
we were called baby boomers, Graham.
baby
We're
boomers.
right
That's,
on the tail end of it.
well,
But
you might have been a boomer,
it
Kevin,
is
but at the end of the day,
interesting that
but
our kids are referred to as millennials,
that,
then
yeah,
Generation Z coming along, and
Mm.
I
yeah.
keep being told that the values of millennials are completely different to the values of baby boomers, and in turn are completely different to Gen Z. So, that's a challenge. That how do we, as that oldest generation, become the leaders of a couple of generations that have got completely different values and probably want a completely different culture?
Big question, very big question. But I don't think it's about necessarily conflicting values. I think it's just it's a different approach to the way people lead and like to be led. But I reckon there's some value in this. Is that I sit in that kind of millennial category, and I think one of the things that I would really be conscious of not losing is what I would consider to be generational wisdom. We've got people who have been in the workforce for a long time, and the last thing you'd want someone to do is to come and say, "Well, that didn't work for us. Let's change everything." I mean, gosh, there's so many great things. And at the same time, I'm looking at the Gen Z, and I even look at some of these people in Gen Z and go, I don't understand that. Like, why would they approach work in that way? And so I've got to learn from two different sides of me right now. And I think I always look at as a leader having three hats that you wear at all times simultaneously, not one or the other. And I look at it as student, mentor, and teacher. And I look at the lens of going, in every relationship, show up as a student, which is asking the question, what can I learn? The second is mentor, which is what can I give? And the third is teacher, is which what can I take and share? And I think if you always have those three hats in every conversation, you'll be learning, you'll be growing, and you'll be teaching.
Wow,
Hmm.
that's a very editable moment in the podcast. There'll be a little clip of that a bit later. So if you've missed it, look at the show notes and you'll find that. But no, seriously, that is really interesting. What was going through my mind when we were talking about sort of different ages? And yeah, you mentioned you're in the millennial. That's quite a stretch anyway, isn't it? Because there's some older millennials and younger ones.
Yeah.
All my three are millennials. But the and then there's younger people who I've dealt with who are Gen Z, so or Z. And basically, then you've got your, I don't know, Gen X, is it? And then you've kind of got older bits, people like you and I, Kevin, but we're baby boomers. But then there are boomers who are that much older. Is there a way in which you could almost have this magical string? There's an idea for a book that basically transcends each one of them. But this is you talk about culture, and I will talk about culture a bit more. But that everybody can gravitate towards this string and sort of pull on it, or a rope, or whatever you want to. That they can feel that they're all in it together, even though they're bringing different things. They're all pulling at different, shall we say, velocities to bring the company to a place that it wants to get to. So there's not a conflict between people, but there's a sort of, the magic of a leader is to bring that sort of string, rope, whatever, and actually have everybody pull on it. And I may be mixing metaphors here, but is there something about that you're bringing to the party?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, Graham. I think that's a perfect way of kind of pulling together this idea that we're all looking for, which is how do we bring the value of our differences into the workplace and create collective alignment towards an organizational goal or strategy. And I often describe it to people as how do we be aligned at the core and inclusive at the edge, meaning that how do we find that one thing that unites us as a team, that aligns us as a team,
Yeah.
whilst respecting and appreciating the diversity and the differences that our team contribute. And I think that's what culture is all about, is like culture helps align us at the core.
Yeah, I mean, is culture one of these new? You see, when it comes to diversity, this word diversity, I always sort of recoil and think, oh, stop bloody lecturing me. And at the end of the day, I've been the diverse one in a group that I was part of because, well, showing the view. I think I'd be the diverse one in a telephone box, Kevin. But the point is, the truth is, you can be diverse, whatever shade, age, color. It just drives me nuts. It feels like somebody's lecturing me.
Mm. There's definitely something about the power of differences, and that could be differences in our experiences, diversity of our thought processes. It could be
Yeah,
cultural and background differences, and I think it's definitely worth acknowledging that there's an aspect of diversity which is designed for people who have been typically excluded from a lot of conversations in the past. And there's also the concept of differences at work, which is recognizing that you can have two people with the same cultural background who show up with very different perspectives and preferences about how they engage with work. You have
yeah,
two people who were, raised in the same town, show up
yeah.
to work, and one person wants to have flexible working, another person wants to work from the office, another person wants to work from home. Very, very different perspectives, but we have to try and find a way to work together.
So in a downturn, which one do you fire?
Which one do you fire? Or the one who's not performing on the outcomes of their role?
Yeah.
I don't think it's about a location. It's are they delivering on the outcomes of their role?
Okay, fair enough. No, I was only I was pulling at a string there, but
It's a big question. It's probably the number one question I get asked at the moment, which
is
is
it?
how do we get people back into the office and get people back into their desks?
Well, isn't that really an interesting point? Because a lot of people, what is it? Who was it? Who was saying that? It might have been on the podcast, Kevin, but somebody was saying that people are going to have to pay a lot more money to people to persuade them to go back to the office. Well, maybe there's an easier way.
Do we need to persuade people to go back to the office? And yeah, we've got Jacob Rees-Mogg saying that the entire civil service is being less productive and wants them back in the office at least 3 days a week. But I'm talking to finance leaders who are working in a remote-only organization. And they think that they're telling me it's one of the best things they've ever done because they're hiring anywhere they want. They don't have the overhead of office space, and they're growing faster than they could have done otherwise. Yeah.
Hmm.
We could have a lot of conversation about this. My big belief around this right now is that an unhelpful measure of productivity within the workplace, and typically the measure of productivity has been output, which is can I see you doing work and can I see how hard you're working, and really what the measure of productivity needs to be outcomes, which is are you delivering on the outcomes of your role.
Your video and one of the videos that I listened to on your website was you yourself said that culture happens on the corridors, on the hallways. You can't do that if you sat on a Zoom call, can you? You can't be if you're 50 miles from the office or wherever you live, a mile from the office, but you just fancy sitting in your pajamas and with a duvet around you with a laptop. I mean, yeah, okay, fine. You would like that, wouldn't you? But at the end of the day, we want you in the office because actually the culture comes about because you're actually chatting to people in the office, at where you're getting coffee, etc. Isn't that part and parcel of it? And you have to accept that as part of being in a business with a culture, or am I just too old to recognise that that's no longer?
No, I think you've touched on something which is important, which is a big question that I've been exploring lately. Because one of the big questions I'm getting asked is how do we get people back to the office? A lot of the reflection I've been having in this space has been what is the role and the function of work for people. And there's three kind of elements of work that I think are important about work. There's deep work, there's teamwork, and there's non-work. And the deep work is the stuff that you do on your own. And I think we would agree there's some things that you just don't want to be interrupted for. They're best done from home, undistracted from other people. The second part is the teamwork. And now I actually think some teamwork can be done online. And we've seen that through the pandemic. We can operate as a team and do it online. But then there's this third component of work, which is the non-work aspects of work. And they're things like culture, they're things like community and purpose that are actually not related to the function of your job that we get from the benefit of being around people. And so I actually do believe there are some aspects, the important aspects of being in the office is not so much because we need it to be able to do your job, but rather because you're in the office, you are in environment and proximity with people. Therefore, you are learning more about the culture that we're trying to create. You're getting the community that potentially you would not get if you were isolated on your own. There is non-work components of work that I think there's a lot more to explore about.
Hmm. I do
Now,
like that.
I picked up a very interesting culture in the organization that my son was working in, where their team was mostly working from home. Okay. But coming into the office, having team meetings, and it was almost frowned upon that you took a laptop with you on the days you were in the office. Because if you're sitting at your laptop doing stuff, well, why did you bother traveling? You're working by yourself.
Mm,
The office day is about talking to other people, working together, figuring out what we're going to do in the next week, 10 days, whatever it is, putting the plan together, and then going off and executing.
mm. And that's ultimately the concept of collective intelligence, right? Which is what is the problems that could not be solved if we did not have this group of people in the room together in this moment. And I think a lot of the kind of concepts of our meetings that we have when we're in the office, we think to ourselves, well, I could have just done that on Zoom. I could have done that from home. But really great team meetings are the meetings that you walk out of and you say to yourself, I just don't think we could have done that if we didn't have this group of people in this room and in that moment. And I think that's a really important part of it.
Do you find it really difficult? Because I feel that with the competing cultural, I don't know, magnets for different types of cultures, that you're precariously balanced on a ledge. And if your business is about going in and helping leaders, and you're kind of like sat on the ledge, then you're nothing to anybody, are you really? Because effectively you're just offering the sort of platitudes of the middle, as opposed to jumping to one side and saying, no, do it this way. But I would admit that you might be able to say, no, do it this way for Kevin, but for Graham, do it that way. So, but is that an unfair characterization of the challenge that you face?
I think part of my role as an external facilitator, especially on conversations about culture, is not to tell people what their culture should be, but rather to help them to facilitate the conversations they need to create the culture that they want. So my latest book was called Let's Talk Culture, and the tagline for the book was the conversations you need to create the team you want. And I called it that because a lot of people were saying, Shane, how do you define healthy culture and toxic culture? And
Yeah.
they were trying to put culture on this spectrum. And the problem with doing that is that if we were to take an example, say, like the military, and we take something which is perfectly standard and normal in military, and we
Yeah.
now try and apply that to education. What might have been healthy in one context becomes toxic in another. And so I find it really challenging to put it on that spectrum. So what I say is, how do we create the culture that you really want? And a lot of that comes back to the leaders of the organization, to the team that they've essentially recruited and built, and getting them in the room together and asking, well, what is the team culture that you want? And then my job is to help them to go about and create that reality.
No, that's a good answer. I find it challenging to try and understand how you would apply the skills in different settings. So that,
Mm.
I mean, you've sort of highlighted that, and I think, I mean, have you ever tried to coach military people?
Look, I've had a couple of people that I have worked with that are in the military,
Yeah.
and I think someone said something to me recently which I really loved. He said, "We don't necessarily understand leadership better; we just say it louder," which I thought was quite an interesting perspective.
Oh yeah.
But he was really willing and open to learn, and yeah, I find the same thing. It's first and foremost understanding the current reality of a lot of organizations. So, what do you have? And the
Yeah.
second is understanding what do you want, and where's the gap, and how do we start to close that gap?
You- I know in your on again a thing that you've highlighted on your webpage, which is to do with remarkable people leaders. One of the things you lead with on your site, I love your site by the way. That one of
Thank
the
you.
lead with your site on your site was, where does leadership happen?
Mm.
And this is a really, you've distilled it down for leaders at least to three different locations. Now, if you've never heard of Shane, and of course you have now, but if you haven't been onto his website, then just give yourself a moment, dear listener, to figure out where that might be. And Kevin's notorious for his research, so he doesn't know what the answer is, do you, Kevin? Oh,
Where
yes. Yeah,
does
this
leadership happen?
on
Well,
this
I'll tell you
occasion.
what the answer is,
Yeah,
Graham.
yeah. Well,
You
no,
figure
but
that one out.
well,
You haven't done any research.
no, well, no. The thing about it is that there are three areas, but I've got a couple of follow-ups on this, but Shane,
Mm.
do you want to give us an idea of what those areas are?
I love this question because I asked this of a council leader in local government in Australia. I
Yeah.
said to her, "Where does leadership happen? If you were to take me on a tour through your organization and you said, here's leadership, where would it happen?" And she said, "Leadership happens on Tuesdays." And I said, "Hang on a minute, what do you mean?" And she said, "So Monday night, all of our councillors get together, they basically make all the strategic decisions, and then Tuesday we execute on all of that work. So the real leadership happens on Tuesdays." So I've had so many different responses to this question. People have said leadership happens in our boardroom, leadership happens in our, strategy offsites, leadership happens everywhere. And so I use these three metaphorical spaces just to represent the spaces in which leadership happens that I describe as the conference room, the meeting room, and the lunchroom. And really what I mean by that is leadership is happening when you are in a collective space. So maybe it's your town halls, team meetings, big group gatherings. The second is it happens in your meeting rooms where you catch up with your team one on one. You have those really personal one on one conversations. And it happens in the lunchrooms, which is those spaces outside of business where it's, you're walking the halls or you're having those cultural conversations. So I say leadership is collective, it's individual, and it's cultural.
Hmm.
Hey, so taking those three spaces, Shane,
Yeah.
we come back to that remote work thing. Now, you can be on Zoom and you can be in the conference room. You can be on Zoom, you can be in one-to-one meeting. How do you do the lunchroom one?
It's really hard. And this is why I think it's one of the areas that's not spoken about enough when we talk about getting people back into the office, if we want to use that language.
Hmm.
People usually say, we need you to return to the office because you're not as productive from home. And we know that's not true. People can be very productive at home. We need you back in the office because, we're leasing an office building and we're losing money on rent. Not a justifiable reason for getting from home. But when we talk about, hey, actually, we need to bring you back because there's something that you get from being in proximity with other people that you can't get from home. Now, all of a sudden, that becomes a different question. But what I will caveat that with is people say, come back to the office because of the culture. And they come back in and, I spoke to someone who came back to the office after COVID and half of the lights were blown, the globes were blown in the office because nobody had replaced them over COVID. And nobody had, so they came back in the office, half the lights were off in the building. There were cobwebs everywhere because it hadn't been cleaned. And we were like, okay, that's not bringing people back into a cultural experience. So
Well, it
when we
is.
say bring
Just,
people back, it's just not necessarily a good one.
it's not a good one. But I think, to be honest with you, they're the prickly bits around the goal. And if I was the leader, I'd be just saying, get that sorted, but bring them back in. Because there is something, I think. I mean, you go back to the times when I used to work kind of from home, but then I'd go to HQ. But then you take your computer in, Kevin, because you had to do stuff. And then if I had a problem, I wouldn't write an email. I'd just, in this particular company, I just go down a couple of floors
Mm.
and I'd go to the person I want to speak to. And it was, sometimes you followed up with an email, but most it was like having a bit of a laugh and a joke and just getting the work done. And figuring out what the problem was in your head, and getting them to explain, because sometimes you try to explain on emails, it's not communicated properly. So I think there's a much better chance of organisations forming a long-term, a pervasive culture if people are together. You put them apart, they'll be looking on Indeed or God knows wherever where they find the next job, and they might be productive, but they won't stay with you long. And I'd love to see the stats on length of tenure with organisations that have got people distributed all over the world or
Mm.
country.
It's a great question. I think if we look at what culture is at its fundamental level, there's two. I usually in the book I unpack four elements of culture, and the first one is that culture is collective, and the last one is that culture is learned. And what I mean by those two is that culture is something that exists whenever you have a group of people together, which means that you don't have culture when you're on your own. You have culture when you're with people. And the second is that culture is something we learn from one another. We create group norms as a result of being together. So if you are working on your own and you're not working in a group, it's really hard to get an understanding and build culture. Now, it's not saying it can't happen. It just means that it shows up differently.
Right. Okay. Just unpack that a little bit more. It
Yeah.
shows up differently. So,
Yeah. So, for example, if your only interaction with your team was a once a week team meeting, then every kind of understanding of your culture will be shaped from within that one collective space. So you will learn about the culture of your team based on whether you have cameras on or cameras off,
Yeah.
whether ideas are added to or whether ideas are shut down, whether you can speak up safely without being,
Yeah.
judged or criticized. So
Yeah.
all your cultural
Mm.
indicators are gained from one context. So you will
Yeah.
get an understanding of culture because you're in a collective and you'll learn culture, but it won't be holistic in terms of understanding what is our organization's culture.
It was about 3 weeks ago that I took a holiday with my wife to an island in the in the Atlantic, and basically we went to see a previous person who worked for me, who's now working for a top four accounting firm that Kevin knows well, and her a close friend. I did feel like I was in a rom-com, but her close friend, who was a bit higher than her but not looking after her work, joined us for a dinner, and he was explaining that the culture of the org, or the way in which management they sat together, and then the teams, the dross, shall we say, or trolls or drolls or whatever they call, I don't know, but the rest of them just sat together as well. So the management were separate, and he personally, without sort of revealing names because I don't want the guy to be fired, he personally found that really at odds with his own thinking, and I think anybody would. Well, obviously the rest of them don't, but the it just strikes me that that's not necessarily a healthy way of actually structuring an organization, but somebody thought it was a good idea at the time.
Yeah, sometimes it is that a person says, this is how we're going to do things, and they just do it. And then eventually, over time, as new people join and leave, it just becomes the norm. And then nobody questions why they do it. I've had experiences in workplace, and you probably had this as well, when you go and you go, so why do you do it that way? And they go, oh, it's because such and such said that we should do it that way. But
Yeah,
whoever that person was left the organization 10 years ago. No one's ever challenged that behavior. And
yeah,
so as a new person coming to the organization, you go, oh, actually, maybe we could do this differently or better. And
yeah,
so you challenge some of the norms. But yeah, I think, I don't know necessarily. Sometimes they create those patterns. Sometimes it's just purely because of a particular person or a group of people. That's just the way they did things. And then that norm starts to embed over time. Unless someone comes in and has the safety and the ability to challenge some of the norms, which is why, if we go back to that original phrase, being aligned at the core and inclusive at the edge,
yeah,
that edge can actually make us better if we are open to hearing it, listening to it, and going, hey, why do we do it this way? Could we do it differently?
yeah. You always need a bit of grit in your shoe, don't you? In that, having somebody like that around is often quite good for you.
Yeah, I was working with a client who was she was a brand manager for an airline, and she's working in a very fast-paced, reactive environment. And she said, Shane, a person joined our team who was very slow, considered, and thoughtful. And she said, immediately I thought to myself, she's not going to fit here because she's very slow and thoughtful. We're very reactive and fast-paced. And then she said, and then I heard your voice in my head. And instead I asked the question, what could we learn from this person? Now, we don't need to change our entire culture to be very slow and thoughtful, but maybe we could learn something from her that shifts the needle just slightly towards her direction.
Do you know, your answers are absolutely on point. Kevin is one of the best podcast guests that we've had today.
But
Really is.
that's probably because he runs his own podcast as well.
Ah, well,
That's
that's
very
probably
kind.
it.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Graham.
and behind that, he's got this thing on air. I think we'll have to get one of those in my office, on
Well,
air.
but Shane, you are a podcaster yourself. Tell us about your podcast.
Oh, yes. To be honest, I was an accidental podcaster, Kevin. I didn't mean to start podcasting. I found myself that I was approved to live stream video on LinkedIn. And one of the requirements is they said you have to go live for 25 minutes, and you basically, the system wouldn't allow you to go live with a guest. And I thought to myself, I don't really want to talk to myself for 25 minutes. And so I found a little system that allowed me to put phone calls into my computer, and then I could call people and then live stream my video. And I called it Phone Calls with Clever People. So I would call people that I knew and that I thought were very clever, and I just talked to them on the phone while I broadcasted myself on LinkedIn. And then people started asking for episodes, and then it kind of turned into a podcast.
Is that true? LinkedIn are happy for you to rabbit on for 25 minutes or more, but to no one in particular, other than bro.
When it
That's
first started,
LinkedIn.
so when it first started, LinkedIn doesn't have a native live streaming
Right.
function. So
Right.
they typically outsourced it to other platforms. And those platforms at the time were very new and didn't have the opportunity to bring guests in like you can now. And
Yeah.
so pretty much that what they wanted you to do was just live stream having a conversation with your audience. But I prefer to have more kind of, conversations rather than monologues. So I just brought my friends in.
Oh, wow. And did they try and embarrass you? Because
No, thankfully, no, thankfully
oh,
they didn't. But I've
no.
had some very, very great guests. Jenny was one of those guests
Oh.
over time, and
Well, she'd have
I'm really
embarrassed you just
delighted.
by being a guest, wouldn't she? Let's face it. I mean, she's well,
I do hope she listens to this.
yeah. If she does, I'm in trouble. But no, seriously though, I mean, you're based in Australia, but presumably your clients are not all there, or are they?
Well, actually, I've just moved to London, so I'm actually I
Oh,
moved to London in September last year, and so
okay.
part of the move was to expand my business across the UK and the USA,
Right.
and I'm still working in Australia, so I'm there quite a lot. But I'm
Yeah.
actually based in Notting Hill now, so I'm living in
Oh, I see.
London.
I see. So, do you have a pub job as well then? Like all
No, no, no,
Australians.
no. Like most Australians, no. I'm actually. I decided to move. I was gonna move to Clapham with all the Australians, but I thought no, I should have a different experience.
But if you're living in Notting Hill, then you can't be doing that badly. So it's seriously though. Forgive my lack of ignorance. Kevin knew the answer to that one, but he didn't share it with me. But so based in London, then. So how is it been for you attracting UK guests to your guests clients to your business?
Yeah, honestly, and to be really transparent, it's been quite challenging. I have only been here for a few months, and so I recognize that I think we know this. Starting any business is quite challenging
Yeah, of
in a
course.
new location where you're relatively unknown. It's quite a big city.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm grateful for is I speak at a lot of events and conferences, and so they're really great opportunities to meet people. And yeah, part of my plan is just to be here over the next few years and just continue to meet great people and connect with great people like yourselves. And I'm sure the work will eventually follow.
Oh, definitely. I mean, yeah, I think you've proven already that you're definitely worth a conversation about this, leadership culture, the way in which you can change to improve the outcomes. Because isn't that why people are there? Isn't that why you're appointed to be leader?
Mm.
That, some of your shareholders or somebody wants you to be successful.
Yeah, someone asked me recently, "What's your definition of leadership?" Big question because it's so hard, and it's like it's such a complex topic, and I boiled it down to this one answer, which was that I think leaders make the lives of the people they lead better in the pursuit of something bigger, meaning that they lead people towards some collective purpose that is bigger than themselves. But in the process of doing that, they should make the lives of the people they lead better. They should become more capable,
Yeah.
full of self-belief, all those things that we should be doing. So I think what I hope to do is partner with people in that process so that they actually can be a more effective leader. And maybe one day someone says, "Is there a leader that made a big impact on your life?" And they go, "Oh, yes. Let me tell you about Graham, or let me tell you about Kevin. Let me tell you what they did."
Well, you won't be saying that. But
That
if you were in therapy, then maybe, I mean,
that move, Shane, from Australia to the UK, you must have seen a culture difference between
Mm.
working in those two countries. Tell me what your perspective on that is.
It's still very early, but what I will say is something I've noticed is there is I'm trying to think of the best way to articulate it. There is a great uh, degree of weight that's attached to people who have done the work to have an opinion. So when I meet people and I talk to people, they care about that you're making an educated opinion and that when you share your thoughts, that you've been thorough in your research behind that. And I really like that about the UK. A lot of people I've met here really value not just an experience, but people who are educated in the process of delivering that experience. And that's been one thing that I've really quite liked. I will say one thing I've noticed quite challenging. In Australia, we genuinely have this belief that I will pretty much give you all of my trust unless you give me a reason not to. Whereas in the UK, I've noticed there is a little bit more caution, which is that I will give you trust, but you kind of need to give me a reason to first. I spoke to someone and they said, how have you met people? And I said, oh, I met this great group of people we've been hanging out with. And they said, where did you meet? I said, on the tube. And they looked at me like I was a psychopath, saying, what do you mean you met somebody on the tube? What, you talked to somebody on the tube? And I said, yeah, we made friends. And that probably gives a bit of an indistinction between Australian culture and UK culture.
Oh no, no, London culture.
London culture. I'll say that London culture. Yes.
If you jump into a car and drive 200 miles north, then you'll find a different culture. But yeah, I do understand the point.
Yeah.
You, you're the opportunity that if you almost like said to yourself, right, I'm here in London, I've got my eyes on America, etc. The next 5 years, if you said, and not, I know Kevin likes the idea of us talking about the next 100 days. I mean, that's just a step, the first step towards 5 years. But you got yourself to 5 years, then you're looking back. What is it that you've done to, shall we say, make a difference? And I know some of that will be about clients and engagement and stuff like that. But is there something that you can almost like you're there now, 5 years from now, you're looking back and you think, oh, thank God I did that. What is it going to be?
Yeah, I have a mentor, his name is Matt Church, who talks about this process of being going from knowing something to being known for knowing something. And
Yes.
I think that's ultimately my goal is as I would love to be known for my expertise around team culture and helping organizations create team cultures that enable people to thrive. But really my big picture purpose in my business is to I use this phrase of multiply impact on the planet by developing remarkable people leaders, which is that for every leader that I develop, I know that they touch 5 to 10 people that are part of their team. So if I develop leaders, I multiply the impact across organizations and on the planet. So my goal really in the next 5 years is to look back and say, did I, to the best of my ability, impact as many leaders' lives as possible? And I don't know. Some people put like, I want to impact 1 million people's lives. For me, it's just about, did I do the best that I could?
A marketing strategy comes to mind because I was talking to somebody else about this the other day. But one of the things that comes to mind in terms of developing, you have to rely on other people getting to know you, which is one part of it. That's almost like the awareness kind of piece. But for those people that you are helping, and to your point, over the I don't know next few months, year, then they might impact 5 to 10 people around them, their board, their significant teams, etc. Knowing those people and actually bringing your brand into their lives, bringing your experience into their lives in a meaningful way, um, might be the route to, because they'll end up going somewhere else anyway at some stage and then dragging you with them. And it just seems to me that that might be a sort of an approach that you can take to build and grow your business at the same, because at the end of the day, you don't want to be talking to people who don't know you that well, particularly when you know people who do know you that well and know of you that well. And if you've had a guy who's gone through that leadership process and they like what they've got from him, from you, then they're your advocates, aren't they? They're the future people who might well hire you and move your business forward. But it's just a thought.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the first things in my first book, Lead the Room, I talked about how do you become positioned, which is how do you become known in an organization.
Yeah.
And one of the first layers that I talk through is how do you find your advocates within an organization. So it's who speaks well on your behalf when you're not in the room. And that just takes time. It takes time and trust.
Sure, it does. And you, I mean, as an Australian in London, you, if you were to spit, you'd probably an Australian, wouldn't you? I mean, they're everywhere.
Encountering Australians
Yeah,
are everywhere.
I mean, they're literally everywhere. I don't know how to. I mean, now that Jenny Stillwell's got to work, we've got one on every damn street corner, haven't we?
I think you interviewed Renee Giarusso, who's a friend of mine from Melbourne as well. So we're slowly taking over the podcast, I think.
No, and we're delighted for that because we love Australians, don't we? Don't we, Kevin? Sorry.
Oh, we do. We do.
Sorry. He was asleep for a minute. Don't worry about that. He's getting old, you see. He's a bit like Joe Biden, really. I mean, you'll be bringing cards along with you. There was something amusing yesterday. It was on the TV. Apparently, it had some shades on, quite big ones, and the camera caught the the questions and answers that he was giving to a journalist questions in the shades because they were that big. He has these cards that he takes around because he doesn't know whether it's Monday or Friday, does he? But at the end of the day, it's sort of it was quite amusing that they caught that. So next time you see him, he'll have these really tiny, non-reflective shit.
I think I might take some cue cards and everywhere I go now. I think that's if he can do it, maybe I can do it as well.
Oh no, well no. The thing is, he can't do it.
I think you need to educate him how not to do it.
Yeah, well, yeah. It'd be nice to have a president or a leader, even in this country, who could actually speak for us. But anyway, by and by. in your business when you're moving into an organization and you're
Mm.
then people have brought you in. First of all, who brings you in?
Normally, it would be an organizational leader, for example, the CEO, or someone in human resources, because they've said to HR, you're responsible for the culture, you sort it out. And they say, we need some help. So it's usually the organizational leader or HR leader.
If it's a PLC, you might have non-exec directors. I mean, you would expect them to be a rich source of referrals for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, usually any person who has had the conversation where they say we need to do something about our culture, that usually is the person who reaches out and brings me in.
So okay, so we know that is, and you get in there, and first thing is what?
So the first thing I do is especially when we're talking about a conversation about culture, we have to look at what is your existing culture. Because we know that culture is collective. One of the first things people will say is, "Oh, we need to do something about our culture," as though they need to design a culture that does not yet exist. But what we know is that culture already exists within an organization where you have a group of people together. So we have to first and foremost understand your existing culture. And a lot of that's talking to the people. Maybe it's an engagement survey, but it's really understanding the existing culture.
Yeah, I do like that. I mean, you wonder. It's not just presumably it's not just in the boardroom and the the C-suite or whatever it is. It's also with the worker ants as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think about a large organization, there's usually 10 to 12 people at the top and there's thousands at the bottom. I think the thousands probably gives you a better indication of what the culture's like than the 12 at the top.
Yeah, no. Okay, so you've then got that idea. So
Mm.
then is the next step what, throwing that back at them in some way?
Yeah, so in Let's Talk Culture, I look at 5 conversations that we have with teams to help them design culture. And the first one is what I call the expectation conversation. And what that's about is helping teams to get into a room and ask the question, what do we expect of one another on this team? And I think what you learn from that conversation is that we approach and we enter into a team that we bring all of our own perspectives and differences. And once we put them out on the table, we then get to sit back and go, okay, which of these differences are we okay with?
Yeah.
Which of these do we need to align with? Which of these do we need to change? And usually, what I think falls out the bottom of that conversation is some kind of cultural aspirations, call them organizational values, whatever you need to call them. But really, what they are is a set of themes that help us to decide where do we want our culture to be.
Okay, all right. So you brought in, you walk
This is where
around,
our culture is. This is
yeah,
understanding our culture.
you're
Now,
then
let's decide where we want our culture to be, which is what do we
right.
actually expect of one another on this team?
So there is a difference then. There's usually a difference, or there will be a difference between
Hmm.
lived experience and desired culture.
Yeah, so I use the phrase that culture is averages, not aspirations, but that culture can be aspirational. And what I mean by that is usually the culture is the sum average of our behaviors. So it's
Yeah,
whatever our behavioral norms are, that's our culture.
yeah.
But it's not our aspiration. We might say we want a really empowering culture, but our team micromanage one another. So the behaviors are misaligned with that. But I think culture can be aspirational, meaning that we're working towards the desired culture. And so I help people design, well, what is our desired culture and how do we make that really explicit and clear?
Is it obvious to you in the, shall we say, the census period where you're gathering information that there are particular toxic um, bottlenecks? In other words,
Yeah, there's
get
definitely
rid of Joe and the culture will change.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of people who do bring me into more so into a leadership team. There's usually 1 or 2 people who are presenting some kind of challenge to the culture that they're aspiring to create. And I always say that a rock star employee can lift the average and a toxic employee can drop the average. They can't change the entire culture, but they can lower the average, unfortunately. So sometimes that is a process of helping them have the conversation with those team members that recognize, oh, this is not the culture that I want to be a part of, and helping them exit the employee. Other times it's helping them to actually make explicit what they expect of that employee so that that employee has given the opportunity to change.
Mhm. Now, Shane, we're talking here about you going into an organization and doing these things. That brings us back more into the realm of the next 100 days. Because you're not going to go and be working as a consultant with that organization for 5 years. You've probably got a project to do that's however long, but I find that if you're doing a change project, for example, you're normally working 3 month, 100-day chunks. If I'm doing business change, I can change processes, I can change systems, I can change organization structures, and relatively do something that's quite effective in that kind of 100-day space. Can you actually change a culture in that time scale?
Yeah, I think about if you were on taking a road trip and you wanted to go from London, let's say you wanted to go up into Scotland or wherever you wanted to go.
Mm.
If you were to say, Shane, my desire is to go to Edinburgh and I'm in London right now,
Yeah.
I could say to you, well, this is how you could get there. And I could give you the map, I could give you turn by turn the GPS. But if you're still in London, you're not where you want to be. Now, in 100 days, you might get, further north, but you might not get to that destination. I don't see my goal as helping people necessarily to go every single step of the way in the car with them, but rather, how do we give you a roadmap so that every person on your team is clear about where we're going and how we're going to get there?
Mm. So it the thing that you're selling then, it is a sort of roadmap, but it's something that is this true consultancy that basically they're answering their own question, but you're just helping them?
I mean, part of that, yeah, part of that's true. So what I essentially see my role is I'm a facilitator of conversations that people typically don't know what conversations to
Yeah.
have. And so my goal is to help them design the roadmap. Now, I know the conversations that will help lead them to design that map, and I can create the space within the room that's safe enough to be able to have those conversations, which they may not be experienced enough to facilitate, but I can help them facilitate those conversations.
If you had to say, right, the next sort of 10 clients will come from these sectors because you think you can really help people in these particular areas, what are they?
Gosh, I love the startup sector. I love people who are growing quickly, typically because they start with two or three people and then they scale very quickly. And now they have 100 people to try and navigate the
Yeah.
culture with. I
Yeah.
love the startup space. I love government. I worked a lot with our Department of Treasury and our Victorian leaders, which is where I was from,
Yeah.
working in government. And I love private sector, people who are,
Yeah.
really trying to work on how do we move from just being an organization that is about making money to actually improving the lives of our people too.
Well, that's three really good ones. You mentioned education. Would you steer clear because that's already dead and buried, really?
No, I think education's great. My first kind of job was working in tertiary education, secondary education. So
Yeah.
I like it. I
Yeah.
think we can do a lot of turning theory into action with education. So love
Yeah.
working with educators too.
There's nothing you can do with that unless you just start again. But I don't know where you get the academics from. But anyway, sorry, no, personal gripe. But no, no, you've been an absolutely first-rate guest. I thought you would be. Yeah, I
Thank
mean,
you.
you're a charming chap, and if you had if you could actually influence the world, if you like, with your parting comments here, and you could that you can influence people with what you're about to tell us, and you're going to get, we're not going to interrupt you, we're just going to give you let's push it beyond 10 seconds, but let's give you a few seconds to actually share something. What would it be?
Oh, the one thing that would influence the world, one of the things that stands out to my mind is to recognize that the biggest differences on your team are actually your organization's biggest advantages. The thing that makes you different as a leader, the thing that makes your team members different, is actually the thing that makes your team extremely powerful. However, those differences could also be the thing that tear your team apart. If your culture is not aligned around those differences and leverages the power of those differences. So if you were to build a culture, build an organization that is strong for the future, the starting point is to have a conversation about your culture.
Wow. um I actually hope that you will get people who will see some of these things in the clips on the YouTube version of this show, and actually make a path to your door. So if they're planning to do that, where do they find you?
I mean, I'm online at shanemhatton.com or
M stands
shanehattonspeaks.com.
for.
M for Michael. So Shane Michael Hatton.
Right.
Shane Hatton's a famous golfer. So if you search Shane
Oh,
Hatton, I might come up, but usually Shane Michael Hatton makes
yeah.
sure you're going to get me.
Yeah. Are you any
And
good at
then
golf then? Are you any good at golf, or is
I'm
it?
horrible at golf, Graham,
Oh,
but that doesn't stop me from playing. It doesn't stop me from
no,
trying.
no. We ought to play against each other. But
It's a game of consistency, and sometimes I'm great and sometimes I'm not. So it depends on what day we play together.
so it's shanemhatton
Dot com.
dot com, and they'll find you there, and they'll find this fantastic website with some great photography. I mean, it makes you look a bit younger.
Thank
But
you. I shot that myself in my house during COVID, so I appreciate it.
really, oh wow,
Yes.
that is pretty good. That's very good. In fact, I thought that was a professional job,
Thank
but
you.
so yeah, well done. But look, I mean, again, Kevin, have you got any final questions for Shane? Because it could change your life.
Oh, he could. He could undoubtedly change my life. I suppose any final questions for Shane? Oh, we've asked him some very, very deep ones as we've gone through this
I've
conversation.
really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I think it'd be unfair to put Shane on the spotlight again for another difficult question, Graham. So,
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, we're not here to be fair. We're not a liberal democracy here. We're a dictatorship for a day. But no, no, seriously. I've really enjoyed you being a guest on the next 100 Days podcast. Shane Hatton, thanks very much indeed.
Graham, Kevin, thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight.
well, quite a big topic there. Culture, leadership. Wow. We've covered a lot of aspects around leading a business, leading groups of people, changing culture, working out what the culture actually is. Now, Graham, what's
Mm.
your takeaway on that?
I, I, Sean's answers were made me feel that I could bring him into an organization, and whatever culture or lack of it was there, he'd be able to take us from where we were as opposed to where he thinks we should be, and almost like lay out this sort of yellow brick road to somewhere that they have the capacity to get to. Now, the elements of that, not entirely sure how, shall we say, draconian it would be, Kevin, but as in, and it's not really up to Shane to say get rid of Joe over there. It's more of a, they've got to have the realization that if things are happening in their organization that are blocking the development of the company because of culture, then it's on them to do something about it. So, but I just felt that his understanding of leadership and where it happens, and the sort of development of a culture, a kind of a way of working together with each other. I found him very, very compelling, especially for a young man, and one that's got the world at his feet right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the areas that he's working in are things that are in practice very, very difficult to change.
Yeah.
As I said during the interview, done a lot of business change myself.
Mm.
You can implement a new system, you can put in new processes, you can change an organization structure. But it's kind of every organization. I love an analogy of a bottle, Graham, that there's every business has a bottle of a certain shape.
Yeah.
Whatever you're doing with it, you're pouring into that bottle, and that change takes the shape of the bottle.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
round one might be a square one, whatever. And that's kind of the culture of the organization.
Mm.
Changing the shape of that bottle is incredibly difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, without spilling out the water inside or the wine or whatever. But I do understand, and it's an interesting analogy, Kevin. And I think um, I it's one of those things that I did the MBA, and they probably covered that, and I can't remember because it's God knows how many years ago. But basically, the whole idea of culture and so forth, it was always there in the curriculum. But I think Shane's gone really deep, and he's developed sort of some thoughts about how he will help organisations. And you know, I don't. There's a pessimism about your bottle analogy in a sense. There is a pessimism that it's glass as opposed to potentially something more malleable. And I think that's the thing that potentially Shane's about. Maybe he's turning glass into, I don't know if plastic's the right word, but something that's a little bit more
Mm.
flexible. Because his point was that, sometimes the extremities are the thing that makes the whole thing work. If you can have a core that people can see work, but then accept, don't much care for the word diversity, but the edges, the grit, shall we say, the people, the slow learner, etc., that somebody accommodates. That seems to me that's a noble cause.
No, it does, definitely.
So we've had another podcast, Kevin, where we've really shaped the world.
Well, let's hope so. Really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, me too. And today I've been Graham Arrowsmith.
I've been Kevin Appleby. Goodbye.
Goodbye.